Okay, you're on.
Hey, Keith. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and I expect we'll have additional people coming in another minute or so. It is really my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Yerushalmi and Smadar Levy, both of whom work at the Weizmann Institute in Israel, which is a place that is near and dear to my heart in the city where I grew up. And it is quite an intellectual powerhouse and just a beautiful oasis. Dr. Idit Yerushalmi is an associate professor, and she heads the Physics Education Research Group, which is both a large and very productive group who managed to get 4 papers during 2020, during the plague. I was very impressed. She has taught physics. She holds a master's in physics from the Technion, Israel Institute of Technology, a PhD from the Weizmann Institute. She did her postdoc at the University of Minnesota and then returned to the Weizmann Institute. Her research focuses on many things involving physics teaching and learning. So there's a lot of work around curricular design, around professional development, and in age-wise spans late elementary. She's got work with 6th graders all the way to secondary, graduate, undergraduate, and graduate TAs, and so on. Her group's current project include the Research Physics Training Program for high school teachers, Gateway to Physics, which are inquiry units for middle school, and interdisciplinary computational science, which is a relatively new project. And she serves as the scientific advisor for the National Physics Science Physics Teacher Center that Dr. Smadar Levy is also involved with. So the National Center of Physics Teachers was established in the Department of Science Teaching at the Weizmann Institute in 1995. It works closely with the Ministry of Education. So unlike Jersey with our 600 districts and 600 boards of ed, Israel is a little more organized with a more national curriculum and national centers for various sciences. And it coordinates most of the operations related to physics education in Israel and implements many initiatives focused on teacher leadership. They have over 1,000 teachers, professional development to support practice, as well as a very well-used website that includes a plethora of resources for teachers and various PD opportunities. So it's a really great resource. And Dr. Smadar Levy, who obtained her postdoc and her PhD at the Weizmann Institute of Science and was also a high school teacher for many years. And her interest is, I think, predominantly around development of physics teachers and teacher leaders. And she leads and studies the Israeli network of professional learning communities. So these are PLCs. I don't know when the PLCs started. I mean, Smadar can say something about that in a minute, but I know that they're ongoing, very serious effort in the country that has been pretty successful. And I believe are associated, but again, I'm not 100% sure if they're coming out of the National Center of Physics Teachers. I know there are multiple kinds of these PLCs, not just for physics. And I'm assuming that the ones that Smadar you're working with are coming out of the National Center of Physics Teachers. So, and we also have, surprise, surprise, their advisor here, but I'm gonna let Idit and Smadar introduce her and continue with the talk. So without further ado, Professor Idit Yerushalmi, Dr. Smadar Levy. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say that the person who established the National Physics Center, and I think also the other national teacher centers, is with us, Batsheva Elon, and she's also the one who put together the communities in physics that today Smadar is leading. And so, hi, Batsheva. Elon. Okay, so here we are. We'll start. We're a little bit late, so thank you, Colleen and Ravit, for inviting us to give the seminar. It was first scheduled, I don't know if you remember, for April 20. I had a flight to the US on March 15, the date our country went for its first lockdown. Now we are in the third, so it didn't work out. So in a way, I see it as a sign that things are going back to how they were supposed to be. I'm giving the seminar with Smadar. Let's hope things will indeed slowly improve. In our presentation, as we said, we will compare and discuss two big projects that are taking place in our department. And we think there is interest to compare them to long-term in-service programs aimed to support teachers in better integrating scientific inquiry practices in students' learning experience. The challenge of representing inquiry scientific practices, as all of you know, is an old one, more than a century old, starting with Q equal to represent scientific process. And it continues with a lot of current calls from prominent institutions all over the world and concerning different stages along the educational continuum. So here is Israel, Europe, US, and this is a undergraduate and K-12, etc. And there are many and sometimes conflicting interpretations of scientific inquiry. Some would emphasize the search process, exploring ways to tackle an ill-defined problem. Some stress the modeling aspect, namely simplifying real-world phenomena. Some think of practices related to the design or execution of experiments. Some title any long-term project that students have some ownership in planning as inquiry. And others think about a step-by-step process guiding students to discover nature laws. For us, inquiry stands for an iterative search process in which students have agency in exploring possible scientific models for natural phenomena. And I just brought a representation by Eugenia Etkina from your faculty of the iterative nature of the process. And as she is interested in physics, as we do, the representation stress that it involves both theoretical modeling and empirical modeling. Physics thrives on the comparison between the two. Now, the persistent calls are the outcome of both external and internal factors. So let's start with the external factors. Those include a variety of structural features that characterize a school setting. Crowded, poorly equipped labs and timelines that is broken into lessons cut down on exploration processes. Standardized assessment emphasizes usually theory rather than modeling practices. There is little experience of teachers in tackling ill-defined problems. And as Carl Weiman put it, an open-ended experiment is a risky endeavor. And indeed, also in our country, it dictates its results in the traditional, closely prescribed lab. These structural constraints drive many to believe that inquiry can take place in, or is better to take place in complementary frameworks, such as research apprenticeships in scientist lab or teacher-led research project in designated labs that allows a space, time, tailored assessment and broad knowledge of advisor that is more friendly to inquiry. And then there are also internal factors. And first and foremost, as Schoenfeld presents very beautifully, are views and practices that teachers formed in past experiences that are activated in their current decision-making. Accordingly, it is reasonable to expect that teachers were educated in traditional labs, in closely prescribed labs. Many experience these labs as teachers, so we expect the activation of action plans that match closely prescribed instructional labs. And this situation raises dilemmas for stakeholders interested in integrating inquiry in student work. And they will take a different route depending on their beliefs regarding which of these factors is most crucial. Namely, if they perceive external factors to be the key, they would direct their efforts to the context which is beneficial for inquiry, complementary framework, but then they will have to grapple with the fact that they are reducing the target audience to fewer students. If they perceive internal factors to be the key, a question that they have to respond to is if and how to tailor professional development programs to meet teachers' needs in settings with different structural constraints. And this brings us to, after this brief background, to our goal. We will focus on commonalities and differences in the internal factors, the teacher's perception, given different external factors. Namely, what we will do is that we will examine teachers' professional development in 2 long-term in-service programs for high school physics teachers that are operated when instructional constraints are loose or tight. One program targets teachers that operate in traditional school setting and the constraints are tight. And the other program targets teachers operating in a setting of research projects in regional designated labs where the constraints are looser. And in both cases, we will examine changes in the beliefs of the teachers regarding their and their students' roles in inquiry, how they perceive these roles at the beginning, what challenges did they face when interacting with their students while guiding inquiry, and how did teachers perceive students' roles following these interactions and following discussions with their peers in the in-service community. So I'm allowing now, I'm transferring now to Smadar, okay?
Hi, everybody. Just to give you some background about the Israeli context, in Israel, teachers prepare their students for a national matriculation exam. They can choose to mentor students in an additional inquiry-oriented subject called Research Physics Project. There is a wide array of long-term regional professional development frameworks, and there are organizational frameworks for academy ministry collaboration with regard to PD, such as national teacher centers, which Ravit mentioned before, and networks of professional learning communities. The in-service programs that we examine here are carried out by the Physics Education Group at the Weizmann Institute as part of these academy ministry collaborations. The 2 in-service PD programs that we studied are the Research Physics Project Mentors Community and the Physics Teachers Professional Learning Communities. The RPP mentors are preparing students to an additional matriculation exam on a long-term project in pairs of students, while the PLC teachers prepare students to a standardized matriculation exam, 20% of which focuses on practical work. The goal of RPP Mentors Community is to advance mentoring practices in the context of Research Physics Project, while the goal of the PLCs program is more general, to advance learner-centered pedagogy in the variety of teaching contexts. The setting of the two programs is very different. In the RPP community, there are 20 research mentors that chose to work in an open lab context and mentor pairs of students performing a year-long project. But in the PLCs, we have 250 high school physics teachers that were not aware in advance that the inquiry lab will be one of the yearly focal themes in the PLCs, and could choose what and when to implement in their classrooms. In both programs, there were 12 meetings during the school year, but in the PLCs, only 4 meetings were dedicated to the inquiry lab. The design guidelines of the two programs derive from the same two paradigms: cognitive apprenticeship to effectively support teachers in coping with significant pedagogical challenges, and knowledge integration, eliciting teachers' ideas regarding students, adding alternative ideas, and steering discussion to acknowledge and resolve conflicts. Professor Batsheva Ilon, who is here with us, is one of the mothers of the knowledge integration paradigm. In the RPP community, the mentors reflect on their experiences and collaboratively discuss dilemmas along the RPP milestones, choosing topic, proposal, constructing experimental setup, midterm, and final presentations. They explicate differences in the roles of students and teachers in traditional labs versus RPP. The PLCs encourage collaborative reflection as well, focused on teachers' practice and evidence-based. The program is structured as a fan model with 1 teacher leader PLC and 11 nationwide regional PLCs, about 250 high school physics teachers, a quarter of all the physics teachers in Israel. One of the yearly themes was restricted inquiry labs. We call it RILS. The PLC teachers first experienced the real activities as learners. A modest restructuring of the standard experiments focused on the why question. For example, students plan the experimental procedures, how to control the experimental variables according to the goal of the inquiry, or reflect on the considerations underlying the experimental design. Teachers who were interested implemented RILS in their lab lessons. They were not obligated to do so. And in the following PLC meetings, they reflected collaboratively on their classrooms experiences. Edith, back to you.
We are in time. Okay, so we are now going to look at the analysis and the findings in these two settings that Smadar described. And I would like to credit this work for Dr. Dorothy Langley, who researched the professional development of the research physics mentors in the community. The research physics, I want to stress, project community was part of a training program that the ministry asked us at the Weizmann to carry out to support the RPP, which was a new school subject. So they wanted to quickly train teachers to be mentors. And so it was a big challenge. And Dorothy took a case study methodology focusing on 4 teacher mentors in the second year of training. And data was collected from a variety of sources and analyzed qualitatively. So here is our first case study, Yulia. Yulia has 30 years of experience, but she has no experience with research projects. And she enters the scene when she mentors a pair of not very strong students with the conception that she's a fellow researcher to the team of the students. And so she says, I was like a student myself. I brought lots of ideas. They were choosy. I felt that the responsibility was mainly on me. So she's not only, she's a principal researcher. Granting agency to her students, however, meets the shortcomings that she soon realizes in operationalizing the agency. And she says they decided to handle the material independently, but they told me they didn't understand it. She starts to fluctuate between two poles as enabler and as lecturer. Opposite stances toward independence with no in-between ladder. So on one hand, in the next session, I derived and explained the formulas. And on the other, I told them to bring their own ideas. 1-2 weeks passed and they didn't deliver. And this is actually a case study that didn't end well. The students dropped out in the end of the year from the program. The other three cases are all of second career teachers, which is something that more than half of the teachers today in Israel, the newcomers, are second career teachers, and many of them were attracted to this, to the RPP because they hoped to bring out in this setting their experience as engineers, as project managers, etc. Let's look first at Isaac. He all along grants very limited agency to the two actually very strong girls he was advising. He perceived his role as accountable teacher, and he framed it in the citation I bring here. I'm not here to discover new things in physics, risking the failure of my students. The teacher's main task is to guide the students toward a high grade in the external exam. And later, for materials they could handle independently, I gave little support. Where they had no background, I didn't send them to study the topic independently. I used a college textbook and gave them 3-4 lessons on the theory. So he is both a manager and a lecturer. And actually the girls, in their reflections on the course, they did very well, but they were, they expressed some frustration that they didn't get enough freedom. Now let's look at Solomon. Solomon starts very uncertain. Should he be a coach or, similar to Yulia, a fellow researcher? So he says, initially I was uncertain. To what extent should I lead? Tells them what to do. In every session, I included myself in the to-do list. And later he takes a coach role. As in any organization, he was actually a project manager in the army, in which I functioned. Motivating people to action is an art form. I needed to create a situation in which the students felt they were leading the project rather than I. Yet the truth was he was tightly involved, taking academic courses with the students, recruiting former colleagues of him to put together the experimental system and so forth. So they worked together. The students were very happy with the mutual work. And finally, Matan, also a second career teacher and a novice teacher, an experienced engineer with a lot of knowledge. And Matan also fluctuates. He starts granting a lot of agency, seeing his role as enabler. He says he believes strongly in self-motivated and self-managed learning, driven by curiosity and the desire to understand the real world. My aim as a teacher is to provide students with opportunities for such learning. However, this approach ended with a lot of frustration for both the students and the advisor. And he says, today I'm less naive than in the past. I used to believe that all that was needed was to enable, and the students will embrace the intellectual opportunity. That was an illusion. I need to support them psychologically. And in the end, he compromises. In the current organizational structure, it is a mentor's role to add the research physics knowledge into the student's ZPD. This is a complex challenge in which I did not succeed to the level I would have liked. So here are our 4 cases spread all over. And if we summarize what we see, we can say that the teacher mentors set out with a variety of conceptions determined by their personal histories. All of them struggled with how and to what extent to grant agency to their students. The interaction with the student research teams and the community, the peers that they were talking with, so many of these things that many of the changes followed discussions in the community, either forced shift from initial conception, like in case study 1 and 4, or refinement. In any case, they launched a continuous process of teacher inquiry into student inquiry. We can see that Isaac and Solomon proceeded with their initial role conception, but still Isaac tailored the scope of the project to his abilities, and Solomon was willing to make a great effort to take the project beyond the scope of his initial theoretical and experimental knowledge. Yulia was forced to change her initial role conception because of the students' difficulties, and Matan realized that with some regrets that his initial beliefs about his students' ability to function in the new learning culture he provided was mistaken, and that considerable more practical and psychological support was essential. So now let's turn for the PLCs and Smadar.
Okay, so teachers from all 11 regional PLCs participated in the study with diverse profiles and a wide range of teaching experience, as you can see, from 1 to 49 years. We used pre and post intervention surveys with both quantitative and qualitative analysis. In the pre-intervention survey, we found a significant gap between teachers' perceptions of the strategies and habits of mind characterizing students in the instructional lab versus physicists in a research lab. In particular, with regard to inquiry practices such as experimental design. For example, teachers strongly agreed that physicists try to understand how an experimental setup works, but students less so, as you can see in figure A, while they agreed that students, unlike physicists, follow instructions without thinking about their purpose, as shown in figure C. The PLC teachers highly valued the experimental practices recommended in the key position papers, but there were significant disparities between the importance attributed to these practices and the satisfaction with their manifestation on the national lab exam. This disparity was largest for inquiry practices. So the PLC teachers recognized gaps between valued and manifested practices. Despite the tight constraints in which the teachers operate, half of the PLC teachers implemented the rules in their lab lessons. I remind you that they were not obligated to do so. There was no significant difference in the implementation on background variables, and the teachers' reports on their classroom experiences indicated a dispersion across the student agency scale, from very little agency when the students were involved in a preliminary discussion conducted by the teacher, to high level of agency when the teachers let the students design the experiment on their own. Almost All the PLC teachers were satisfied with their students' engagement when carrying out the wheels. Like the students were enthusiastic, the students had to cope with the missing instructions and think alone what to do. Yet the teachers were concerned with students' difficulties and frustration when trying to cope with the changes. The students did not understand what I want from them. Some students failed to carry out the experiment and some gave up. Almost half of the teachers faced class management challenges, such as not knowing when and how to help the students and struggling with the time limits. We don't have time for that. We have to be prepared for the final exam. It took much more time, so we had to continue during the next lesson and set up the experimental system again. I didn't know when and how to help the students. I had a hard time not knowing how the lesson would progress. Most of the PLC teachers perceived the offered changes to be feasible and fruitful for their students, even though they faced severe structural constraints and challenges as demonstrated. Despite these challenges, about half of the teachers reported that they intend to keep using wheels and to give even more agency to their students in the future. About a third were planning various scaffolds to help students cope with the challenges, such as more explanations before the activity or hints during the activity. Out of these, 20% plan to reduce the students' agency.
Okay, so we are almost wrapping up. We want now to look at the commonalities and differences between teachers' PD in these two contexts, their initial conceived roles, the changes they underwent following the encounter with their students, and the collaborative reflection in the community. So if we look for, wait. I think. Okay. So, given that the RPP mentors had a priori chosen to work in a relatively open context, while the PLC teachers were not aware in advance of the inquiry component, the real component, we expected a difference in the ways they would operationalize students' agency. Between teachers that participate in either PD framework. So what we expected was that on a student agency scale, the RPP teachers will be on the high end of the scale, while the real teachers would be scattered down the scale. And indeed, and despite the constraints in which the PLC teachers were operating, as Madar just described, the teacher reports indicated dispersion across the students' agency scale. We found that while they were satisfied with their students' engagement, they were concerned with difficulties with the agency granted to them. And as a result, the spread shifted a little bit lower, as we can see from here to here. Okay. Contrary to our expectations, though, when we look at the RPP community that we expected to be crowded here, we can see again a lot of variability. While both in the initial approach to students' agency, even though many started with a willingness to grant a lot of agency, almost unrealistic expectation regarding how much agency to allow for the students, Isaac didn't want to do so, and limited students' agency from the beginning, but following their experience, most mentors reduced students' agency a lot, and sometimes even too much, going into a lecturing mode. So when we look in both PD programs and asking ourselves our guiding question, we see that changes in teachers' perceptions regarding granting agency to their students reveal in a way a similar pattern in the two PD programs, so in very different scales. I mean, one was a long-term inquiry, one was short inquiry, but the spread of the teachers, mentors, the dilemmas they grappled with echoed very well each other, independent of the structural constraints of the core setting in which they operated. And in both settings, teachers had to go significant change in their norms and practice that required continued support of the community. So, thank you. Time for questions. And
yeah, yeah, go ahead, Ravi.
Well, so I'm opening it up to questions from anyone in the audience. I could start with one of my own. So I was wondering, in terms of the cases, I don't remember the name of the teacher from the first case.
Julia.
Julia, that's right. So, and you said that her student left, right? They dropped out. And I was wondering, because afterwards, when you spoke about some of the other cases, it sounded like you had interviewed the students or had gotten some information from the students about their perceptions. And I was wondering if the student that left, was there a chance to interview a student or students that left? Was there a chance to interview them? Was it the case that the fluctuating between, enabler and coach, if I remember correctly, those were the terms you used.
Enabler and lecturer.
And lecturer, right, sorry. Enabler and lecturer, was that part of, was that an issue? Was the reason the students left, did that have to do with the way in which that teacher supported their work, or was it a different reason that they left? I'm just wondering about, whether there was some.
The students wanted to stay. The students chose, I mean, both teachers and students in this case chose to be part of this course. Because this was a new subject, both teachers and students were allowed in without exams or any wrong way to sort out who fits in and who does not, okay? Clearly, Julia didn't have letters to provide these students. Whether such letters would be enough for these students is a different question. You're correct, there was two, the person who researched the students is not Dorothy Langley, it was a different research. Michal Sigron is her name, and I almost did not bring in data from this research. But I cannot answer, but I think also Julia dropped out actually.
Oh.
She was, I mean, she did the work, but she's not doing any more of this work. And we did not provide her enough support, or she was not, it's always a question.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I just had a question. I was curious when teachers talked about like if they plan to continue with giving the students more agency, so they might provide more scaffolds, and it said they would provide like hints or like greater explanations. Did they give examples of like the types of hints? Were those just like hints about the content or about how to go about, conducting?
Yeah.
Maybe I will answer with it.
Yes.
Usually in Israel, the experiment they do to the matriculation exam are ready-made kits. They like have a plate with all the experimental setups, and they just do it like, I don't know, like book, do this and now do that and put it here and plug it there. And the change was just to let them design it by their own and understand what is the goal of the inquiry and where they are going to take this setup. So teachers were afraid that it is too much for their students. They didn't know, they were overwhelmed with the frustration. They couldn't handle I don't know what to do. What do you want from me? So there was the whole variety of responses to this. From, I will just tell them how to plug it or how to put the setup or, choose something and from I will let them do it by themselves. And different teachers had different ideas of how to do it. Many of them decided to explain more in the beginning. This is our goal, we want to ta-ti-ta-tam, and so on. And then they let go. So a kind of altogether scaffolding at the beginning. Others were bothered with some weak students and some strong students in the same class. So they decided to give different scaffolds to different students. So maybe this group can work by their own and do okay and success, but in this group, I should be involved and take some of the agency back. So we had many examples of different responses of teachers.
Hi, so I'm curious to understand the nature of the mentoring program. So how did teachers get into the program? Do they volunteer? Are they selected? And then how did you pick teachers to focus on in the study?
The teachers chose to take this subject. No. The teachers chose to take part in this program, and we didn't do any selection process. If someone was interested, they could join. But as part of being in the training program, they had to mentor a pair of students. Okay?
Yeah, so it's based on
So we met them both. We were in the same room when they were mentoring the students. They came to a regional lab at the Weizmann, okay, where the students came. The students came from different schools and the teachers came. It was not the teachers of the students, okay? So they didn't, many of them didn't know the students before they entered the program. And so it was a high-risk situation because the students were preparing for a matriculation exam. And to that end, what we had in place was what we called academic advisors that were walking around and intervening if something went completely wrong, okay? Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you, thinking both about the, what would be practical to succeed in promoting among most or all teachers. What would you see as the ideal to be aiming for in terms of how much epistemic agency teachers grant to students? So I guess, there could be an ideal that only some teachers could reach, but what's an ideal that you think most teachers could reach?
So that can I answer and then you answer?
Please do.
When you say ideal, I think about an ideal in a context, okay? So it's a different thing if I'm talking about ideal in an ideal world with no constraints, and an ideal given that we have a matriculation exam and that we understand that professional development processes are long. So when I think about ideal, I think about it, where can a very long-term process take the teachers? And I think this is our third year, Smadar, this year. What I told you about was happening
2019.
2019. And we kept trying different ways in the PLCs. And I think given the and I'll say one more thing, that another thing, because it's so big, we have the possibility to negotiate with the ministry a little bit and to have some impact on the ministry.
Right.
So we change a little bit the constraints, but we can not change it altogether, okay? Right. So I think when I think about the ideal, I'm thinking whether the ministry, whether we can convince the ministry to different learning goals to be put in place for the exam. And it's a very long process that I think has to be very gradual, because if you suddenly change it, the teachers has, the basic things, they have a contract with the students about the matriculation exam. So you cannot change things quickly. You can change one element at a time and work with the teachers on it, change the assessment, and slowly enter more and more practices from the inquiry practices, whether it is about understanding how a theoretical model and an experimental model relate to each other. Something we didn't touch at all. We looked at the design features of the experiments. Slowly, we take each one of these practices and open it more to more and more considerations by the students. But it is a interplay with the ministry and how we can slowly, hopefully, change assessment practices by the ministry that constrain us a lot. Madam?
Yes, I want to add some perspectives. I want to mention that in 2015, we had a kind of pilot trying in the PLCs to integrate inquiry experiments, which were all open, like right above our heads, the teachers' heads, and of course the students' heads. And it was quite interesting for the teachers as learners, but almost nothing got into the classrooms. So it took us back, and it took us almost 3 years to pick up how we are going to continue if we want to do integrate changes. And we started in 2019 in this whole new perspective of step by step, which we see success in. And another interesting thing is that since we work with the PLC teachers, which are so many teachers, and we work with them on other subjects as well, not only lab context, we see that the changing paradigm of letting go, have the students on his own or on her own doing something, it gets to all physics lessons. They change the way they think of things, their consideration, their decision-making, is affected by what happens in the lab experiments, but they take it to, you know, a theory lesson as well, which is quite interesting to see, and it takes time. It's a year, 2 years, 3 years until we see these changes in a large scale, but we do.
Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe another 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions? I was actually curious about the students and what kind of preparation they had beforehand, right? So some of the frustration of the students, if they've never had extensive agency, that's,
Okay.
you know, that wouldn't be surprising, right? So I'm curious if you can say a little bit more, because, you know, I'm not that familiar with the Israeli curriculum in physics since, you know, when I was in high school, and I'm sure that most of the other folks on the call are not. So can you say a little bit more about what they're used to?
I want to say, your question is in 2 different contexts. I want to comment on the RPP, and we just had David Pearl, who left us, who actually looked exactly into that. Why? The RPP project is actually a 3-year program, and the first 10th grade and third of or half of 11th grade is not the big project that students working. So it's more of a preparatory program for inquiry. And it slowly opens up different facets of inquiry. So actually, regarding the students participating in the RPP program, there was a ladder put in place before the project mentors entered in. And David was, and it was very interesting. One of the things he researched was he asked the students to, after they were 2-3 months into the project work, to reflect on this preparatory program and say what was beneficial and what didn't make any importance, was not significant, etc. And it was, his findings are very interesting because it show, in a way, it exposed the ways similar terms have different meaning in the traditional lab and or in school context and in research physics, and whether he was able to bridge or not. And I'll give an example. An example is the presentation of the project, so communication. There was a lot of work about communication, but they didn't think it was very important at that stage. Okay, why? In school context, when there are inquiry projects in middle school, very little, okay? And usually in this context, it's like a festive, and you don't really defend. I don't see you suddenly. Suddenly everybody are black?
No, we're here, Edith.
Okay.
No, I think we're good.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Now I see everybody coming. I don't know, something went wrong on my computer. So, so when students present in school, they don't really have to defend a scientific argument and get criticized about it. It's a situation that is festive and it's not risky, okay? And when they were presenting in what we wanted them was to have the experience like scientists do, that is that you defend your argument. But at that stage, it only, you know, we didn't, the preparation didn't make them understand this, how important this is, because it was too different, okay? They understood it later on when they ended, when they had to go to the matriculation, but it was very difficult to convince them. While other aspects were much more easier for them to grasp because they had similar meaning, okay? Now, the question regarding the PLCs is different because the letter is different. Okay, so I'm not sure about whether you asked about the RPP students or the students in the PLC that are.
Well, on some level, I guess both, but I think that the students in the PLC, I'd be interested in that as well if we have a minute. I don't know if Smadal can.
Madam?
Well, I think it depends on the teacher. We didn't study the students directly. We just can know what the teachers reported or reflected during the PLC meetings or in his portfolio or when we talk to them and in their surveys. So I think some teachers have an intuitive feeling how to approach such a change. And some were just diving deep down and came with this new activity today, not telling anything. And it was a huge change for the students. So I think we have a large spectrum of preparation or non-preparation and all in between. But I think the change was not so visibly for the students. So when they got the manual, they had a manual. They were not dropped to do everything by their own. They had a manual, but there were thinking questions there, and there were open spaces there. So they need to stop and think. And there, I think it depended not on the preparation, but what the teachers did during the activity. If he could hold his breath and let them struggle it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, they will be okay. But if they were stuck and he just got there and he told them, so do that, or why don't you do that? Then he and or she and them got frustrated. So I think it was most the interaction that struggled and not the preparation. Do you agree?
When you think about a ladder, you have to think about middle school. This is high school students. In Israel high school, we mean 10th to 12th grade, and we are talking about physics students, which is a little bit like your AP, not so high, so it's larger, but it's not the physics that everybody takes. It's the physics that is for the elective course, okay? But these students, their background in inquiry is for middle school, right? And I think in middle school, it's actually, again, an extreme. And in physics, we really have a problem because middle school projects commonly are not in physics because the teachers are coming with out of field disciplinary background, and it's very difficult to run inquiry projects in physics that will also do theoretical modeling. And so they have almost no experience in inquiry work in physics, but a very, very, very qualitative, only empirical one that does not really serve them. So, and we are actually trying to work in middle school now, and we build such units in physics, but most students didn't experience this curriculum, okay?
Well, I think, I don't know if there are any more questions, but I think we're out of time. And so I wanted to just end by thanking Edith and Smadal so much for the presentation. It was really interesting, both in terms of understanding what's going on in Israel from education perspectives, PLC, and some of the similar efforts that are going on in the US and the specific findings you shared. So everyone can just join me in thanking them. And Colleen, I'll transfer to you to close.
I close the same way you close.
We would like to thank you because it made us work, right?
Yeah, we had to be organized.
Well, thank you for taking the time out tonight, whatever it is.
Thank you very much, everybody. Stay healthy and safe.
You as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.